Knowledge check 1. For what types of designs does the WWC require studies to demonstrate baseline equivalence? A. Low attrition RCTs. B. High attrition RCTs. C. QEDs. D. Options B and C. Or E. Options A, B, and C. The correct answer is D. Both RCTs with high attrition and QEDs must demonstrate baseline equivalence. Choices B and C are only partially correct for this reason. Choices A and E are not correct because low attrition RCTs do not need to demonstrate baseline equivalence. This is because the WWC assumes low attrition RCTs have equivalent groups on average. Low attrition indicates the sample lost between randomization and analysis was likely not large enough to introduce bias. Knowledge check 2. Does the WWC assess equivalence on baseline characteristics for the original randomly assigned sample or for the analytic sample? A. The original randomly assigned sample. B. The analytic sample. C. Both the randomly assigned sample and the analytic sample. The correct answer is B, the analytic sample. The analytic sample includes the intervention and comparison units used to estimate the effect of the intervention. We want to know that these analytic intervention and comparison groups are equivalent. Choices A and C are incorrect because the WWC does not calculate baseline equivalence on the original randomly assigned sample. Equivalence of the originally randomized groups wouldn't reflect possible bias introduced by changes to the sample from attrition. The WWC only requires a demonstration of equivalence on the analytic sample to show whether the two groups in the analysis were similar before the intervention occurred. Knowledge check 3. Is it possible to need to assess equivalence for some, but not all, outcome measures in a study? Yes or no? The correct answer is A. It is possible to need to assess baseline equivalence for only some outcome measures. In an RCT, attrition may differ by outcome measure, so some outcome measures may have high attrition and others may have low attrition. The study would only need to demonstrate baseline equivalence for the outcomes with high attrition. Knowledge check 4. A study identifies the 20 lowest scoring first grade students in a school as eligible for a supplemental reading intervention. The study randomly assigns 10 students to receive the program and 10 not to receive it. The researchers give pre-tests and post-tests to all the students. At pretest, the students in the intervention group had a mean score of 23, and students in the comparison group had a mean score of 35. The standard deviation for both groups was 5. Does the reviewer need to assess equivalence? Yes or no? B is the correct answer. No, the study does not need to demonstrate equivalence. The study is an RCT with low attrition. The key statements are the study randomly assigns 10 students, and the researchers give pre-tests and post-tests to all the students, so we know that it is an RCT and no attrition occurred. Nothing suggests that the study compromised the random assignment. Even though the students in the intervention group scored very differently from the students in the comparison group at pretest, we do not need to evaluate these baseline differences in an RCT. Knowledge check 5. In a QED with 50 students participating at follow-up, 25 intervention, 25 comparison, these 50 students took a pretest that resulted in the following scores. The intervention mean was 46 with a standard deviation of 20. The comparison mean was 50 with a standard deviation of 20. What is the highest rating this study can receive? A. Meets WWC group design standards without reservations. B. Meets WWC group design standards with reservations if the analysis includes a statistical adjustment. C. Meets WWC group design standards with reservations regardless of whether the analysis includes a statistical adjustment. D. Does not meet WWC group design standards. The correct answer is B. Meets WWC group design standards with reservations if the authors appropriately control for this difference in their analysis. The study uses a quasi-experimental design, so choice A must be incorrect, as QEDs cannot receive the rating of meets WWC group design standards without reservations. The study must demonstrate equivalence, and in this case, using the formula for Hedges G, the baseline difference comes to 0.20 standard deviations. This is in the adjustment range of 0.05 to 0.25. Therefore, the study's analysis requires a statistical adjustment. If the study controls for baseline differences, then it could potentially receive the meets WWC group design standards with reservations rating. Because baseline differences are in the adjustment zone, the authors must report an analysis that statistically controls for the differences to receive the meets WWC group design standards with reservations rating, so choice C is incorrect. Since baseline differences fall within the adjustment zone, it is possible for the study to meet WWC group design standards with reservations if the analysis appropriately controls for baseline differences. Choice D is incorrect. Knowledge check 6. A study examining a science intervention collected outcome data at 3 points in time: immediate post-test, 1-year follow-up, and 2-year follow-up. Researchers used propensity score matching to identify a comparison group at the beginning of the study. The propensity score included demographic characteristics, as well as a pretest of the science achievement measure. From the final report, which focuses on the 2-year follow-up, we can calculate the mean difference on the propensity score for the initial sample, 200 youth, 100 in each group, which is 0.03 standard deviations reported as Hedges G. We can also calculate the mean difference on the propensity score of the 2-year analytic sample, 150 youth, 80 intervention, and 70 comparison, which is 0.10 standard deviations when reported as Hedges G. Has the study demonstrated equivalence? Yes or no? B is the correct answer. The study has not demonstrated equivalence. Propensity scores are appropriate for forming groups, but studies cannot use them to demonstrate equivalence. The study authors need to report baseline statistics for the individual measures required by the review protocol to demonstrate equivalence. Knowledge check 7. True or false? Studies that use imputed baseline data cannot demonstrate baseline equivalence. This statement is false. Although studies cannot use the imputed baseline data to demonstrate equivalence, there are ways for them to demonstrate equivalence. If the imputed baseline data are only for non-required measures, then the study doesn't need to use imputed data to demonstrate equivalence. But even though the imputed data are not for a measure required by the protocol, the study still needs to use a WWC-approved approach to do the imputation. Additionally, studies with imputed baseline data for a required characteristic can satisfy the equivalence standard if they use baseline data for a complete case analytic sample. Even if the study does not report such data, the WWC asks authors about this. If the complete case analysis is provided along with baseline data for that analytic sample, that data might demonstrate equivalence. This concludes our review of baseline equivalence, Module 3 of the WWC's Group Design Standards training. Let's review what we learned in this module. We discussed the WWC's equivalence standard, which the WWC applies to studies that use randomized controlled trials with high attrition or compromised random assignment, and those that use quasi-experimental designs. We learned what baseline equivalence is and how to calculate equivalence, including how to compute Hedges G and Cox's index. We also discussed how to apply the WWC's equivalence standard and some special issues to consider when determining baseline equivalence. For another summary of the WWC baseline equivalence standard, see the WWC standards brief on baseline equivalence available on the WWC website. Up next in the training series, Module 4 will discuss WWC standards related to confounding factors. Just a few final reminders. You can access all the resources mentioned in this module through the WWC website, whatworks.ed.gov. Please note that the full slide deck for this module is available on the WWC website. This includes detailed responses to the knowledge check questions. To receive a certificate of completion for viewing these training modules, you must view the videos on the WWC website. Thank you for viewing the Baseline Equivalence module.